The Maroons of Jamaica represent one of the most profound examples of resistance and resilience in the face of colonial oppression, tracing back to the earliest days of African enslavement in the Caribbean. Their story is one of strength, survival, and a relentless fight for freedom that echoes across centuries, revealing the social, political, and cultural foundations that have helped preserve Maroon identity in Jamaica. These communities, established by enslaved Africans who escaped the brutal plantations and settled in Jamaica's dense, mountainous regions, developed a fiercely independent society. They not only defied the British colonial government but established a unique culture, rooted in African traditions and adapted to the rugged terrain of Jamaica. The story of the Maroons is a testament to the spirit of resistance, community solidarity, and cultural endurance that have shaped their legacy as a distinct group in Jamaican history. The origins of Jamaica's Maroon communities lie in the island's colonial history. Beginning with the Spanish occupation of Jamaica in the early 16th century, enslaved Africans were brought to the island to serve in labor-intensive roles on Spanish estates. Despite harsh conditions, Africans resisted their bondage from the outset, and some managed to escape, finding refuge in the island's remote mountains and forests. This period of early resistance was intensified in 1655 when British forces took control of Jamaica from the Spanish. Upon their defeat, many of the Spaniards fled the island, but they left behind a population of Africans, some of whom retreated to the hills to avoid capture by the new British colonizers. The term Maroon is thought to derive from the Spanish word cimarron, originally used to describe runaway or wild animals and later applied to runaway slaves. Over time, the term took on a powerful connotation in Jamaica, coming to represent the self-liberated African communities that emerged in the island's mountains. The British occupation dramatically increased the influx of enslaved Africans brought to work on sugar plantations, and this brutal system of forced labor sparked resistance among the enslaved population, with more individuals fleeing to join the Maroon communities in the hills. These early Maroon settlements grew rapidly in size and became more organized, as escaped slaves joined forces with the African-born community members who had already established their independence in the mountains. Unlike enslaved Africans on plantations, the Maroons crafted their communities based on African traditions of governance, spiritual practices, and social structures. These communities were intentionally isolated from the colonial settlements and towns, allowing them to evade British control and sustain a way of life that was distinct from that of the European colonizers. Thus, the origins of the Maroons in Jamaica can be traced back to both a response to colonial oppression and a desire to preserve African cultural identity in a hostile foreign environment. From the beginning, the Maroons of Jamaica were in constant conflict with the British, who saw the Maroons as a direct threat to their control over the island's plantation economy. The Maroons' knowledge of the Jamaican landscape, particularly the dense, rugged mountain regions, gave them an advantage over British forces, who struggled to navigate these challenging terrains. Maroon leaders such as Cudjoe and Nanny emerged as prominent figures, organizing raids on plantations, freeing enslaved people, and engaging in guerrilla warfare against British forces. These leaders, both revered for their strategic acumen and feared by the British, symbolized the spirit of resistance that defined the Maroon communities. The British found themselves unable to suppress the Maroons effectively, despite their efforts to capture them and dismantle their settlements. The Maroons' military tactics, heavily influenced by African methods of warfare, involved surprise attacks, ambushes, and the use of the environment as a form of defense. For example, Maroon fighters would strike quickly, inflicting significant damage before retreating into the forests and mountains, where British soldiers had difficulty pursuing them. This form of resistance underscored the Maroons' ingenuity and resourcefulness, as they transformed the very land that symbolized their freedom into a fortress against British aggression. The Maroons also used psychological tactics to protect their communities. The British, frustrated by their inability to subdue the Maroons, began to perceive them as almost supernatural beings, particularly because of their reputed prowess in battle and their deep connection to the land. Stories circulated about the Maroons' spiritual practices, often led by powerful figures like Nanny, who was said to have the ability to catch bullets with her hands and to possess other supernatural powers. These legends contributed to the formation of a distinct Maroon identity that combined African spiritual beliefs with a reputation for physical resilience and courage. The Maroons' identity thus evolved into one that was both culturally rich and intimidating to their British adversaries, solidifying their position as a community that would rather die than submit to enslavement. The struggle between the Maroons and the British escalated into what became known as the First Maroon War, lasting from the early 1720s to 1739. The conflict, a protracted series of skirmishes, raids, and battles, underscored the Maroons' determination to defend their autonomy at all costs. In their frustration, the British resorted to harsh tactics, including destroying crops and attempting to blockade the Maroon settlements. Yet, the Maroons remained undeterred, using the terrain to their advantage and evading British forces through an intricate system of trails, hideouts, and escape routes that spanned the island's mountainous regions. After nearly 2 decades of conflict, the British, unable to decisively defeat the Maroons, opted to pursue peace through negotiations. The Maroons, led by figures such as Cudjoe, saw this as an opportunity to secure a formal recognition of their autonomy. The resulting treaties of 1739 and 1740, signed by the British and various Maroon groups, effectively established the Maroons as semi-autonomous communities within Jamaica. These treaties granted the Maroons freedom, the right to own land, and autonomy over their internal affairs, in exchange for their agreement to cease hostilities and to return any newly escaped slaves to the British authorities. The treaties, while contentious, marked a turning point in Jamaican colonial history, as the British were forced to acknowledge the Maroons as a distinct and independent group. The agreements, however, also had a divisive impact on Maroon society, as the requirement to return runaway slaves created tensions between the Maroons and the broader enslaved population. Nonetheless, the treaties solidified the Maroons' status as a free people and marked the beginning of a new era in which the Maroons could build their communities with a measure of security, albeit under the shadow of British oversight. With their autonomy recognized by the treaties, the Maroons were able to consolidate their communities and develop a unique culture that blended African traditions with adaptations to Jamaican life. Maroon society was organized around clans, which were led by a council of elders and a chief or colonel. The leadership was often hereditary, passing through family lines, though leaders were also expected to demonstrate qualities of bravery, wisdom, and spiritual knowledge. Spirituality played a central role in Maroon life, with rituals, dances, and ceremonies reflecting the Maroons' African heritage. Practices such as Chromanti ceremonies, named after the Akan people of Ghana, helped to preserve a distinct Maroon identity, providing a link to the ancestors and strengthening communal bonds. Language, too, was an important aspect of Maroon culture. The Maroons developed a Creole language, influenced by African languages, English, and other elements from the Caribbean, which facilitated communication while distinguishing Maroons from the English-speaking colonial society. This language not only served practical purposes, but also helped to preserve the Maroons' African roots and reinforce their cultural separation from the British. The preservation of African customs in music, dance, and food further reinforced Maroon identity, allowing them to retain a connection to their ancestral homeland while adapting to life in Jamaica. The Maroons maintained a self-sufficient economy, relying on agriculture, hunting, and trade with neighboring communities. They cultivated crops such as yams, plantains, and bananas, which were staples in their diet, and they hunted wild game in the forests. Maroon women played an integral role in maintaining the community, engaging in farming, crafting, and child-rearing, while men often took on responsibilities related to defense and leadership. This division of labor was not rigid but reflected the communal values and practical needs of the Maroons, who had to remain vigilant and resourceful to sustain their independence. The relative peace achieved by the treaties of 1739 and 1740 did not last indefinitely. By the late 18th century, tensions between the Maroons and the British had begun to resurface. In 1795, a new conflict erupted, known as the Second Maroon War, when British authorities attempted to impose new restrictions on the Maroon communities. The spark for this war was the British decision to arrest 2 Trelawney Town Maroons on charges of theft, a move that the Maroons saw as a violation of their autonomy. When the British sent a detachment of soldiers to enforce the arrests, the Maroons responded with force, marking the beginning of another violent conflict. The Second Maroon War, though shorter than the first, was marked by fierce fighting. The Maroons demonstrated once again their expertise in guerrilla warfare, launching raids and ambushes that frustrated British forces. However, the British, learning from their previous failures, employed new tactics, including the use of bloodhounds brought from Cuba to track the Maroons in the mountains. The British also launched a scorched earth campaign, destroying crops and laying siege to Maroon settlements in an effort to starve them into submission. The war ended with a controversial treaty in 1796, in which the Trelawney Town Maroons agreed to surrender in exchange for clemency. However, the British reneged on their promises, and instead, nearly 600 Maroons were forcibly deported to Nova Scotia, where they faced harsh conditions and continued discrimination. This betrayal left a lasting scar on the Maroon communities, as it underscored the fragility of the autonomy they had fought so hard to secure. The deportation of the Trelawney Town Maroons served as a reminder of the British Empire's willingness to use deception and force to maintain control, further entrenching the Maroons' distrust of colonial authorities. The history of the Maroons in Jamaica is one of survival, resilience, and resistance, and their legacy endures in Jamaican society to this day. The Maroon communities, despite the challenges and betrayals they faced, managed to preserve their culture, identity, and autonomy in a society that was dominated by colonial powers. Maroon descendants continue to live in communities such as Akampong and Moore Town, where they uphold the traditions of their ancestors and celebrate their history through annual festivals, storytelling, and rituals that honor their African heritage. The Maroons have also left an indelible mark on Jamaica's national identity. Their spirit of resistance against oppression has inspired generations of Jamaicans, symbolizing the struggle for freedom and justice in a land shaped by the legacies of slavery and colonialism. The Maroons' successful fight for autonomy has been celebrated as one of the first instances of anti-colonial resistance in the Americas, and their story resonates with broader movements for liberation and human rights across the African diaspora. Today, Maroon communities in Jamaica continue to advocate for recognition of their cultural heritage and land rights, working to protect their traditions and natural resources in the face of modern challenges. Their story serves as a reminder of the power of resilience and the importance of preserving cultural identity in the face of adversity. The Maroons' defiance of colonial authority and their determination to maintain their independence remain emblematic of the struggle for freedom, a testament to the enduring legacy of one of Jamaica's most remarkable communities.